Hello and welcome to World Business. I'm Guy Schoen. Now, it's been impossible to ignore the noise around President Trump's tariffs. So we've taken a closer look at what they really mean, particularly for trade with China. Let's begin with that wider picture. President Trump's sweeping tariff offensive has reshaped the global trade landscape. It began on the 1st of February 2025 with a 10% duty on Chinese imports, soon escalating into a far-reaching economic confrontation. Well, the most dramatic moment came on the 9th of April when Washington imposed a punishing 125% tariff on Chinese goods. Simultaneously, Trump announced a 90-day pause on further hikes for most other nations. The rationale? To steady nervous markets, allow room for selective negotiations, and intensify pressure on Beijing by isolating it. Well, China's response was swift and pointed, retaliating with 84% tariffs on American imports, tightening restrictions on rare earth exports, and placing a number of US firms on its unreliable entities list. Well, the fallout didn't end there. The European Union, still reeling from earlier US tariffs on steel and aluminium, responded with a $23 billion countermeasure. Brussels denounced the escalation as disruptive, warning of deep and lasting repercussions. Elsewhere, countries such as Brazil and South Africa are actively exploring alternative trade alliances, while close US allies Japan and Korea are seeking exemptions amid ongoing talks. Well, markets saw a brief uplift on the news of the pause, but with Beijing so clearly targeted, it's evident that this was no step back. Diplomacy has been sidelined. Economic brinkmanship now takes center stage. As mentioned earlier, it's China that has taken the hardest hit. Chinese American entrepreneurs now find themselves in a precarious position as Trump's revived tariffs place renewed strain on their operations. These levies, first introduced during his initial term and now reimposed, are putting immense pressure on businesses heavily reliant on Chinese imports, from electronic distributors in California to furniture suppliers in New York. Many are contending with spiraling costs, supply chain disruption, and diminishing margins. Though intended to punish Beijing and reduce the US trade deficit, these tariffs are also having unintended consequences. Small and medium-sized Chinese American firms, many of which serve as key intermediaries between the US consumer base and Chinese manufacturers, are proving especially vulnerable. While some are attempting to diversify suppliers or absorb the impact, others are warning of redundancies and closures unless relief is granted. What began as a bold geopolitical maneuver has evolved into a daily struggle for thousands of business owners who now face not only economic strain, but cultural and political scrutiny. As this tariff war drags on, they're left to navigate growing hostility from Washington and deepening uncertainty at home.
As U.S. President Donald Trump trades tariff threats with Beijing, Chinese American business owners in California say they're feeling squeezed. And importer Taylor Chow says that pain will be passed on to the restaurants and retailers that he sells ingredients to.
Soy sauce, noodles, starch, this is a basic consumer product. Day to day, they use a lot and a large volume. But you put up that much tax on it, that will jet up the price a lot. Right now, the tax is 54%. Once we run out our inventory, definitely we're going to raise the price of 54%.
China, first row.
Those higher prices are coming soon, with U.S. reciprocal tariffs taking effect this week, and they may ratchet up even higher. China responded to the tariffs with its own on U.S. imports last week. Now, Trump is threatening a new 50% tariff on goods from China, on top of the 34% rolling in on Wednesday. Danny Huang owns a small grocery store lined with imported noodles, sauces, garlic, and ginger. He says he's getting ready to hike all their prices.
After this week, we might going to increase the price for those the products. I mean, those ingredients and the sauce. How much they pretend, how much will be, how much they're going to increase the price for us. The tariffs increase, and then will be like, we need to make up that percentage up there on the price.
On Monday, Trump said on his Truth Social site he would begin talks with countries who have requested meetings about tariffs, but not China, saying, quote, all talks with China concerning their requested meetings with us will be terminated. On Tuesday morning, Beijing hit back, vowing not to bow to blackmail from the United States, and that, quote, if the U.S. insists on having its way, China will fight to the end.
Well, joining me now to discuss this in more detail is Qindu Zhu, a senior fellow at the Pangol Institution, a Beijing-based think tank. Mr. Zhu, thank you very much indeed for joining us on World Business. How do you view these long-term implications then? The tariffs clearly are dramatically changing Chinese-American economic ties. Tell us about your view of those long-term implications.
Well, these tariffs on the surface is about the numbers the U.S. side imposes on imports of Chinese goods, mostly here. But behind these tariffs is the whether it's Republican, or it's a Democratic president, the U.S. goal is pretty clear. That is, the strategic goal is to you can say contain China, to keep China down, to make sure China will never replace the U.S. to become number one economy, or even stronger in economy, military, or other aspects. And with that in mind, you can see the long-term consequences of such a dramatic tariffs. 125 now. Basically, there is no trade between the two countries in that situation. So you can see, first of all, there's decoupling efforts from Washington. And now I would say there's probably, in a sense, the Chinese response. China is understanding that, they cannot stop this decoupling trend or effort. So they are also doing or preparing to be standing on their own feet. China has been preparing for the past, let's say, 4+ years since the Trump administration 0.0. So yes, that's why China responded rather quickly to the tariffs increase in Washington, basically several rounds. And the long-term, secondly, I would say, it's really consequences not only about the two countries, it's about the global trading system. Previously, it's surrounded with WTO, the World Trade Organization, with rules everybody agrees upon. If you have a dispute with your party, with any party, you go to WTO. There is a dispute settlement mechanism. So whether you like it or not, there will be a ruling everybody follows. So that's the way to grow and to conduct global trade. But now the Trump regime basically said that, I'm dictating the rules of doing trade with the U.S. How powerful the U.S. It is dismantling the multilateral trading system. It is changing the global order in a way that the U.S. will benefit in absolute terms. Smaller economies, whether they're happy or not, they probably will be compelled to cooperate with the U.S. side. But China, which cherishes independence very much, so they will do according to their own terms. So this probably will lead to the third point, that is, we are going to see, likely, I would say, to see two centers, basically, bifurcation, people would say. On one hand, you have a trading bloc or relationship surrounding Beijing, which stresses very much about equality, mutual respect, disputes resolution. On the other side, you have Washington-centered, businesses relationship. There, you follow the dictates from Washington. Otherwise, you will be punished. that is the case. That is a severe disruption of the global trading system.
I mean, you talked there about some of the differences between the two great countries. One of the things that both leaders of China and the US have said in the past is they've both spoken in different ways about the importance of trust when doing long-term deals. What impact have these recent trade policies, do you think, had on trust between US-based Chinese entrepreneurs and Beijing's commercial strategy?
Good question here. I think in terms of Trump, it's easy to point it out that most of people will agree that it's very hard today to deal with the U.S. regime because, with this Trump featuring or taking pride in his uncertainty. He's known for being uncertainty deliberately. So he can strike a deal under his so-called art of deal making. There's a lack of trust, I would say, not only from the Chinese side, but also from many other countries. Because even you reach a deal with Trump, and you don't know what will happen tomorrow, and whether he will read or whether he will follow the rules or not. You have no idea. Look at what happened between the trade agreement between U.S., Canada, and Mexico. That agreement was signed by Trump himself, and during his second term, a couple of months ago, he refused and rejected all those terms. He will do whatever he likes, despite this strong opposition from Canada and Mexico. There's very little you can do to deal with such a personality, I would say, such a country, such a regime. And this current tariff dilemma right now, with so numerous, I would say, enterprises on the Chinese side and also the U.S. side being affected. For example, importers on the U.S. side of Chinese stuff, basically they have, all the business grinded to a halt. There's very little they can do. And on the Chinese side, exporters, to the U.S. market will also find an equally harsh time for them. But both sides are affected critically. The U.S. side basically saying that, China, give me a call, beg for mercy, and then I will talk to you, and I will dictate the terms you follow in our bilateral trade agreement. Obviously, Beijing says no. And so I think there's a lack of trust. That's a serious question on for people in Beijing, because if you strike a deal with Washington, and you don't know what will happen next year or even next month, so there's a lack of trust. This is a very difficult issue. And if you look at the philosophies for the two leaders, for the Chinese side, either Xi Jinping or previous leaders, their philosophy is clear. That is stability and predictability, long-term planning, long-term relationship. Well, on the U.S. side, you have Donald Trump, who, as I said, prides in uncertainty, unpredictability. He thinks his advantage. So you have the two very different systems, very different thought, school of thoughts, and a very different for now. And how do they deal with each other is, on one hand, interesting to watch. On the other hand, is worrying because the two countries are so powerful. Their relationship is affecting not only people of the two countries, but also the entire world. A lot of countries will be forced somewhat to choose sides, or they try their efforts to maneuver, to find some flexibility to protect their own interests. So this is a time of disorder or the lack of order, unfortunately. So now what we need the most is trust. Unfortunately, that's what we are lacking.
It's very interesting that you spoke there about the lack of trust between the world's two biggest economies, a difference also in philosophy. I'd be interested in Beijing's analysis of the ideology that they perceive might be behind this. Do you believe that the targeting of Chinese imports is predominantly economic, or does it have an ideological component too?
Well, previously during the Biden administration, you might say so. There's ideological, so-called value-based foreign policy or strategy. Although that is not really true, for the Chinese side, they are very flexible. They deal with countries with all kinds of philosophies, all kinds of political systems, all kinds of, let's say, ideologies. It doesn't matter for the Chinese side, what kind of ideology you have for a particular country. We deal with each other on the equal footing with mutual respect. China has been consistent in expressing very much the respect of sovereignty, territorial integrity, and that is the way they deal with countries, however small in terms of size or population, always with respect. But for the U.S. side, of course, Biden stressed very much about, we are different from China. We are a democracy. China is a autocracy, dictatorship. So they basically singled out that kind of differences, in political systems, to basically, of course, to take advantage of that kind of characterization, so as to unite, to rally their partners, their allies in European countries, for example, to form a kind of alliance, form a kind of similar line or tone against China. But for Donald Trump, I don't believe there's a strong ideology. For him, it's all about profit, money, or making America great again. He has a lot of goals. Some of them are very prominent. Industrialization. He wants to bring jobs back to America, manufacturing jobs back to America from China, from Vietnam. For example, the Vietnamese side facing this high tariff. Basically, they offered, we would like to have zero tariff for the importing of U.S. goods. What about that? And Peter Navarro, the White House economic advisor, saying, no, this is not enough. What's important is about non-tariff matters, non-tariff issues. And when the Vietnamese side, okay, we would like to purchase more U.S. weapons to reduce the so-called trade deficit on the U.S. side. And then the U.S. side says, no, we want to bring the jobs back to America. That means the suicidal move for the Vietnamese, basically, okay, move the factories to Washington, to the U.S., at the expense of interests of the Vietnamese. That's just impossible. So they want to narrow this trade deficit. They want to have a reindustrialization. They want to export to the rest of the world. But at the same time, they want to maintain the dollars into reserve currency status. That's just impossible. If you want to maintain the US dollar's position, and then you have to import more, and you have to have a trade deficit, basically. That's the idea. That's a theory. Otherwise, you would want to export more, then the US dollars, the reliance on the US dollar for other countries will be reduced. That's not something Trump will welcome. So it's all about US interests, all about, all the interests Trump perceived. That kind of interest, for example, or jobs back to America, reindustrialization, narrow the trade deficit, etc. He's using this kind of a tool in the 1950s, 60s, or even earlier, to solve a problem that of the 21st century. And he seems a bit ignorant about economics, let's say.
Mr. Xi, sorry to jump in, Mr. Xi. Just on that, actually, it's very interesting that obviously the world's two great economic powers do need to find a way to coexist together, to work together. The world is too interlinked for that not to be something that both sides desire. With Beijing actively expanding trade through BRICS and the Belt and Road Initiative, how crucial then is Washington to China's long-term economic strategy?
Let me, summarize that in, if I can, with a very concise answer. That I think Washington's role in China's long-term economic strategy is minimized. It's being minimized. Is more and more minimal because Beijing wants to rely on the U.S. market as less as possible. Because there's you see the hostility, you see the uncertainty, you see the bullying acts, and you have to do something to protect your own interests. You want to be independent, away from that kind of Washington believes. So what we know now, for example, as a response to the 125% tariff on Chinese goods, at this point, there's no tit-for-tat increase of tariffs from the Chinese side. What we have right now is, from the spokesperson of the Chinese Commerce Ministry or the Foreign Ministry, the idea is like they are taking measures to encourage consumers more of those goods supposed to be exported to America, and that is domestic consumption. So that's part of to stimulate domestic consumption to make China a powerful, market for consumption. First of all, that's the assistance to solve the problem, immediate problem because of the U.S. tariffs. Secondly, that's also part of the strategy of the, I would say, long-term strategy of transforming the Chinese economy from relying on export and heavy investment to one that is driven by domestic consumption and also high-tech manufacturing and innovation. So I think China is taking this there's a danger, but also it's an opportunity to make the danger, to make the challenge an opportunity for long-term economic structuring or restructuring of economic expansion, to be more domestic market dependent rather than depending on the external market. At the same time, I would add that, yes, the Chinese export to its partners or non-US partners, for example, to the Southeast Asian countries, ASEAN, 10 of them, has been increasing, and ASEAN has been the largest trading partner of China over the past 3 years, passing that of European Union or the United States. And then obviously China's trade and investment with the Belt and Road countries has been growing rapidly on a yearly basis. And within the BRICS group, China is obviously working actively to increase the trade among these nations. That's part of the overall strategy to be distancing themselves from Washington, to reduce their exposure to this, a market that can be decided by the whims of one man in Washington.
Thank you very much. Very, very interesting indeed. A complex network of both dangers and opportunities lying ahead. Mr. Zhu, thank you very much for joining us from Beijing.
Thank you, Mr. Guy.
Well, that is all we have time for on this edition. Please stay in touch with all the latest business news on AnewZ.tv and across our social media channels. And join me again next time for more World Business.